So with that in mind, let me introduce you to our panel of experts. Nick Dalton serves as the director of the MEP and Fire Protection Division at Howard Zimmerman and Associates. He leads the team in investigation, design, and installation of major system upgrades. We have John Colatrera. He's the executive director of the MEP and Fire Protection and Forensic Engineering Group at HLZAE. And both Nick and John are going to be discussing how to create a plan to tackle Local Law 97 and where to begin and plan accordingly. So now a brief introduction just to Milrose. So why do we do what we do? At Milrose, we don't just manage risk, we safeguard your project success from cost overruns to penalties, lost revenue, and we protect our clients and key stakeholders from a significant financial impact. Successful projects require teamwork, collaboration, and effective communication, and our industry generally relies on partners who bring knowledge and capabilities to create and deliver value to the end users and owners. So our internal DNA combines licensed professionals and industry experts who have been delivering value to clients across all 50 states. We are uniquely positioned to provide professional services, including permitting, code consulting, and energy-related services across a variety of building types. With our team of companies, we've successfully managed compliance, special inspections, professional services for projects both in New York City and everywhere else. Next slide, please. Learning objectives. So today we're going to share with you some of our insights and provide you with a framework to help you understand and plan for Local Law 97 timelines. Planning for project timelines is crucial for local law compliance in New York City for several reasons. The first is strict deadlines. So proper planning ensures that projects are completed on time to avoid significant fines. These upgrades can be complex. Building and system upgrades can both be technically complex and time-consuming. They require careful scheduling and to ensure that the completion of these projects are going to be made on time. And probably even along with that is the financial planning aspect of it. So if you're implementing energy efficiency measures across a wide variety of different building types, you're going to have to kind of plan for these activities to be able to take full advantage of all the incentives, rebates, and make sure things are structured appropriately. Coordination with stakeholders. Effective planning involves coordinating with various stakeholders, including engineers, contractors, building officials, utilities, tenants, the DOB, building occupants. There's a wide variety of people that get involved in the planning process. And as you'll see, once we do that, it's to make sure that we're communicating and all aligned to make a successful project. And the last thing that we're going to kind of talk about too is that, most of these things are in a phased implementation as you start to see the timelines. So planning these timelines help break down the path to compliance into manageable phases to be cost effective. And that way we can all be better stewards of time and financial resources. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to John Colatrera to share his expertise, best practices, and insights to minimize your risk when you're trying to plan for Local Law 97 compliance.
Great. Thank you, John. Hi, everyone. So we're going to start off with the DOB's plan. So a Local Law 97, it is a local law. It's a New York City local law, so it's governed by the jurisdiction of the New York City Department of Buildings. It goes all the way back to 2019 when it was first put into place. As you'll see as we go through a few slides, the DOB is under a lot of pressure to implement Local Law 97. Some of their latest initiatives to be ready for Local Law 97 is they've tripled their staff, which is dedicated to Local Law 97. How we view that is if there's increased staff focused on Local Law 97, there's going to be enforcement of the fines. So the concept that Local Law 97 is going away. Over the past 5 years, there have been many clients and industry professionals that we know that thought that it was either going to be removed, watered down, or changed dramatically. We advise all of our clients Local Law 97 is certainly here to stay, and it's being bolstered by the actions that the DOB is taking as we speak right now. Additionally, the DOB has also generated quite a bit of guidelines to help building owners, building managers, industry professionals navigate it. Next. So how did we get here? This is a slide that kind of depicts how we got here. So as you can see on the left-hand side, New York City is ranked number 3 globally in greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, number 3 globally. So, I mean, that in itself makes a big statement in that there was a response that was needed by the city to get this down. Looking on the right, citywide emissions in buildings. Many people on this call are either building owners, building managers, or just industry peers. And as you can see, most of us are involved in residential or commercial buildings. And on the two top parts of the graph, excuse me, you'll see natural gas for both of them is a big part of the carbon emissions. And as we go through this slide, we're going to talk about ways to combat that by swapping out some of the fossil fuel burning, natural gas burning equipment that can reduce the building's greenhouse gas emissions. Next. So I want to just talk about a little bit of the city of Yes, in particular, the carbon neutrality piece. So this was a zoning initiative that was to basically free up or allow certain green initiatives to take place in various aspects of the buildings and as well as in buildings. EV chargers, solar panels, and other initiatives, all with the goal of reducing carbon emissions and getting to that kind of holy grail, if you will, of the carbon neutrality as we approach 2050. The building component is a big piece of it, as you can see from the bottom part of the picture, and the building piece is being directly addressed by Local Law 97. So the coefficient change over time, this is your greenhouse gas coefficient change over time. This is one of probably the most important slides that we have here in the presentation. I'll explain why. So if we focus on the top two lines, the gray line and the green line, okay, these are your fuel oil lines, the top gray, and your natural gas line, the green. As time goes on, right now, all the way out to 2050, you basically see the coefficient staying the same. And what does that mean? That means that if you were to install a brand new gas-fired boiler right now that increases your efficiency, okay, you're going to kind of get a one-time reduction in your carbon emissions because, as you can see, the coefficient for those two fuels do not change over time. So you're not getting what we like to call kind of like a two-prong impact. So now let's switch over to the yellow and the purple lines. The yellow being electricity and the purple being district steam, Con Edison steam, utility steam, whatever you'd like to call it. As time goes on, you can see that the coefficient for both of those fuels is going down. So meaning that if a building owner or manager were to take an initiative and undertake a project that is a fuel conversion, meaning that you're going from natural gas to electric or even natural gas to city steam, you're going to get that upfront savings or reduction in greenhouse gases, as well as over time as the respective grid operators, right, either electricity or gas, improve their position and reduce their greenhouse gases. That gets passed on to the building. So that continues to improve over time. It's very important when working with your industry professional to make selections on what the next piece of equipment or the next plant upgrade is going to be. Next. So understanding the timeline. So what many may still not know right now is that if you own or manage a building that is subject to Local Law 97, you're being evaluated as we speak, literally right now, because 2024 data is the data that's being used to populate the first report that's going to be submitted to the DOB May 1st of 2025. So again, little recap. Your building is being evaluated with its usage for utilities right now, and then you will be required to bring on a registered design professional, either an engineer or architect, to file your first Local Law 97 report in May of 2025. The good thing that I'll share right now is that many buildings over the last few years have been doing some minor energy improving upgrades that have positioned 80+% of buildings that are subject to Local Law 97 in a position that don't have them receiving any fines for this first milestone. So that's good. But it's not time to be wasted. And as we continue to go through the presentation, we're going to show how important it is to focus on the time that you have right now and use it wisely so that you can position yourself the best way possible as we get to that second compliance period, which is in yellow on the top. Next. So keeping with the mantra, I have plenty of time. I just hired an engineer. He or she evaluated my building. I'm not going to have any fines from 2025 to 2030. I'm in great shape. I don't need to do anything. Well, as a trusted advisor, we always like to tell our clients that's really not the right mentality to be thinking about, right? While you will not be getting fines per se for 2025, your building falls into that group all the way through 2030. It's very, very important time to utilize for planning and execution because let's be honest, when you're trying to make a big impact on your scores, that's likely going to take a big project that's going to be very costly and it's going to take quite a bit of time to plan, implement, and figure out the financing for. So this slide right here, we as industry professionals put together this slide, and we've been using it to educate our clients and inform our clients of basically what it can take sometimes to undertake one of those big impact projects that can actually do some meaningful results, meaningful impact to your scores. So right here, it's simple overview, and we're going to go step by step, is the planning and the preliminary design. Next slide. That's fine. Thank you. Planning and preliminary design, right? Understanding where a building is at right now is very critical. There's some building owners and managers that still are unaware, of basically where they stack up. Am I getting a fine next year? Am I not getting a fine? Critical first step, followed by doing a review, an investigation, and a building by building investigation, meaning that every building, while similar, could be uniquely a little bit different. And it does take a very strategic review, right, of that building to come up with very specific items that can be sought after to reduce the overall emissions of the building. That process, again, just to share, that process in itself to do your review and then actually come up with a plan could take anywhere from 6 months to a year, and which includes preliminary design or even construction documents. So first 6 months, you're evaluating the building, doing your investigation, followed by the next 6 months, maybe putting together preliminary design. Right there, you've already lost, or you've already utilized a year is probably the best way of saying it. As I showed on the slide with fuel types, alternate fuel types that will improve your greenhouse gas emissions over time, electricity being one of them. On the screen right now, we have our friends from Con Edison working in the street that would be bringing in new power to the building. So if your engineer or architect is coming up with a plan that is converting over fossil fuel burning equipment over to heat pumps, something that's electrically driven, the process in terms of evaluating the power needs, putting the load letter request in, and then actually getting the power to come into the building, we're living it in real time. And that process in itself could take anywhere up to 2 years. We've seen it take even longer for some major upgrades, but 2 years from the time of submitting for this request and actually having the power in the building is actually very realistic for some of these large scale projects that are actually replacing fossil fuel burning equipment with electrically driven equipment. Next. Equipment availability and pricing, right? So I think the biggest thing that we want to share on this particular slide is when you're evaluating these very large, very expensive, impactful projects, you have to be specific and you have to be particular with the equipment that you want. This isn't the days of COVID anymore where it's, we'll take whatever we can get because we got to keep the project moving. You're now strategically planning so that you can have the best bang for your buck. And to do that, you have to select that equipment up front, but then many times you have to wait for it. We have multiple active projects right now where the availability of the very specific equipment that we want could take easily, sometimes a year to get to the building. And that's post doing your design and doing your evaluation. So right now with the slides that we've shared so far, you already could be 2 years, 2.5 years into from where you started, and you haven't even put, as the old saying goes, you haven't even put a shovel in the ground yet. And you're already potentially halfway through the runway that you have until you could start getting fines. Next. Obviously, the installation and the operation. Once, obviously, the equipment has been selected, it's been ordered, the contract has been awarded to an appropriate contractor, obviously the equipment would then be rigged into place and the installation would begin. And again, just to recap, a year in planning and evaluation, a year to a year and a half to get the equipment. You've already submitted your request into Con Edison. Now you're starting to build your plan. And that's assuming that we have space in a building that will allow us to basically start to build new equipment while existing equipment is in place. Because many times the equipment gets to the building before the power, say from the street, is available, which introduces an interesting challenge in terms of planning and scheduling the job. Again, all things to take into consideration, and further extends the timeline if there's a bit of a wait or a pause in the job. Fully operational. Now, so fully operational means that the new plan or new component is actually installed. It's been powered by the additional power, and then it's actually running, and that it's actually starting to reduce your fuel usage and reduce your emissions output. Given some of the examples that we just shared, this could be at a minimum of 3 years all the way up to 5 years, depending on the magnitude of the job. And if you're a lucky building that's not going to receive fines until 2030, we just very clearly laid out 5 years that it could take for a large project that's going to be impactful to actually get, from A to B. One of the other tips I want to share on this fully operational timeline and slide is that the overall commissioning of the equipment. It's not enough these days to make meaningful impacts to specify the right equipment, get the right equipment installed. It's actually to commission it, making sure that it's actually operating, performing, and giving you that return that you initially paid for, so that you can actually start to see those fines and greenhouse gases reduced. So in summary of the example project timeline, we tried to kind of stack on top the 5 steps that it would take to get you to compliance. Now, that's compliance for really to go past the second compliance period. So maybe you've kind of have a buy, and the first compliance period, you're good. You don't have to do anything. You're going to implement essentially a 5-year project, which could be, a multi-million-dollar project to get you compliance through the second compliance period. Again, the importance is to not stop there, is that as you're implementing that second compliance period project that we just went through in detail, you're also thinking about the third compliance period, meaning that maybe the first project you did was a conversion from a gas-fired chiller to an electrical centrifugal chiller. Now, as you start to think about your third compliance period, maybe you're going to attack the envelope of the building, the facade, the windows, the roof, to bolster your insulation measures. So again, the importance of knowing where you're at, planning for the next 5 years and implementing, and not stopping there and thinking about, the third next compliance period. So at this point, I want to transfer over the mic to my colleague, Nick Dalton, to go through some of the additional details.
Thanks, John. As a director here at HLZ, our team's focus is concentrating on MEP and energy-related projects. So a lot of these timelines that John just mentioned are things we're working on actively for our customers. So now we're going to, focus on some of the compliance-specific items and continue to build the case for building owners and managers to take action. As consultants, we typically advise our clients that if that action is not on a specific decarbonization project, to at least get a handle on how they're planning to comply with Local Law 97 and where they're going to focus their effort and their budget. Next slide. Okay, so let's be honest. One way or another, you're going to prepare your budget differently, regardless of your approach to Local Law 97. The question is, would you like to use the money to pay the fines associated with Local Law 97 non-compliance, or would you like to use that money to improve your building, increase your occupant comfort, decrease operational costs, all the while avoiding fines and penalties? These are the high-level goals that we discuss on a daily basis with our clients. So, as it is with any DOB requirement, meeting these filing deadlines that they put forth is important, and we want to avoid any fines for failure to comply or submit the report on time. But the meat here is that with Local Law 97 is understanding when your penalty for non-compliance kicks in And that's crucial for planning your compliance strategy. So as we know, with each compliance period, the emissions limits get lower, the fines get steeper. And so as time goes on, it's important to keep that in mind. An experienced engineering firm will not only be able to ensure compliance reporting is completed, but also provide a full Local Law 97 preparedness report to identify the most relevant carbon reduction measures for your building and outline the impact to your building of implementing those measures. So your provider should have a clear understanding of your building, how it's being used, the state of your existing MEP systems, the building envelope, and then they can apply this knowledge. And it's critical to develop, with this knowledge, develop the specific pathway to compliance for your building. Whether that includes adjustments to your emissions limit, good faith efforts as written into the law, building upgrades for decarbonization, or a combination of any and all of those. The important takeaway today is that there are many factors and nuances to compliance that truly need a proactive approach. And that approach should be developed by an experienced provider. So just an important distinction here for Local Law 97, that there is a difference between your building's gross square footage, which is pulled from the Department of Finance records, and that determines whether you need to comply or not with Local Law 97. And then the difference between the gross floor area calculation, which is specifically used to and needed to calculate your emissions limit for Local Law 97. It is a service that HLZAE provides and has provided to many of our customers. This is a square footage verification service that includes measuring the building as a whole, and then each individual space as it's determined by the Energy Star portfolio manager. And this is used to verify, number one, that there's no mistakes with the city records. Number two, that your building does need to comply with the law. And there aren't any nuances that we need to discover. And then number three, because the law is written such that your emissions limit is dependent on the size of your building, we can ensure that the maximum emissions limit is afforded to you and your building. So a lot of people ask, if they're in a bad position with Local Law 97 as it stands currently. No, you're not out of luck. Or if you're soon to be over the limit as the 2030 deadline emissions limit approaches. If your building's facing emissions that are over these allotted limits, within the 97 legislation, there are opportunities to mitigate fines through good faith efforts. Each item listed here has its own compliance requirements that need to be met. If you're pursuing a good faith effort. Given the complicated nature of going down this path, it's important to put a plan in place to meet these various DOB requirements to qualify for this approach. And another important takeaway is that this is not a reactive process like some of the other energy-related laws in New York City, like 87, 84, and 88. Therefore, Local Law 97, selecting the right professional, planning your compliance strategy is even more important. If you don't do anything because you think the law is going to go away, or you think that decarbonizing your building without much thought or effort is going to be easy, the penalty for this delay will mostly affect your bank account. Not only can fines levied on the building be substantial if you wait to the last minute to take action, you may add insult to injury. So if we revisit what John was just speaking about earlier with the sample project timeline, equipment lead times and contractor availability will start becoming a concern, especially as we move towards 2030 with so many buildings attempting to complete similar projects around similar timelines. So it may not be time to worry, but it is time to take action. So roughly 90% of buildings in New York City required to comply with Local Law 97 are not going to see a fine until 2030. Contrast that with 30% of buildings forecasted to not see fines by the 2030 compliance period. A large chunk of buildings in New York City, will be facing fines when we get there. And now is the time to start planning for that second compliance period. And to anyone's defense, local law 97 is a massive change in the New York City landscape of ownership and management of buildings. And most people don't have a background in engineering, architecture, construction. Therefore, most people don't have a full understanding of what this will take until they see a projected timeline like we just laid out, and what it takes to implement a CRM or carbon reduction measure at your building. So as you can see from the quote at the bottom of this page, this is after presenting our timeline for implementing a chiller upgrade project. This was a direct quote from one of our clients, which led to them taking action. Fair to say that they were a bit surprised. So yes, building upgrades to the envelope and MEP systems are essentially what we're talking about with any carbon reduction measure or CRM. In a perfect world, as any engineer or architect would like it to work, a holistic approach to building decarbonization is the best route. This ideal approach may include repairing or upgrading all 6 sides of the building envelope to ensure you're not losing any energy. Then right-sizing the most efficient electrically driven HVAC system to become the model building in New York City. But as we all know, these best laid plans are not always achievable, which is why you need the right professional to determine your building's individual approach to decarbonization. Maybe with the consideration of increased energy costs from a decarbonization measure, it's better for the building to continue using natural gas for heating, for the next 5 to 10 years while your existing equipment still has life in it. And, other carbon reduction measures can be implemented in the meantime. We want to ensure that you get the most out of your original investment of your heating equipment or whatever equipment it may be we're talking about. Maybe a hybrid gas electric system is the best fit to meet your building's goals of resiliency and the demand for heating, cooling, and likewise. It's possible that the window replacement project that costs $5 million, versus the heating plant upgrade that costs $1 million, doesn't fit into the picture of the building's current emissions and financial situation. So all of these things are what we're taking into account when we're proposing measures for buildings to take. HLZAE, can be your partner in this local law 97 journey. The evolving landscape of this new law demands having a professional partner that is able to navigate the twists and turns as the law continues to evolve. Just this past week, new proposed rules are up on the city's website for public comment. So having somebody that's entrenched in what's going on at the city level and how that affects your compliance is important. Our professionals serve on New York City code review committees. We serve in local law 97 DOB working groups for new rules. And we have completed numerous local law 97 preparedness reports for our current customers. I personally think that our staff of engineers and architects bring an immense legacy knowledge of just New York City buildings and local law code compliance together with our creative solutions for decarbonization and those compliance strategies, to be a top service provider in this space. I think we're going to switch it back to John Z.
Yeah, thanks, John. Thanks, Nick. So just to kind of summarize a little bit of what we've talked about here today, there's really a need to prioritize the compliance. So local law 97 is not going away. And if you look at the industry, the industry tends to be more reactive instead of being proactive. And if you think about these types of things, when it comes to the timeline, equipment ordering, it's going to cost more and it's going to negatively impact stakeholders in terms of both time, money, and the quality of life. Because if everyone procrastinates, you have everybody competing for a finite number of resources, for the filing, for the construction, for the design, all those types of things. And then, also to kind of fall in line with that as well, a holistic approach is definitely going to be the most effective way. It's not, you want to avoid just little generic measures and single issue solutions that are ultimately inefficient for meeting the overall building performance. Doing things right the first time as planned and structured manner will definitely be more effective for you in terms of your planning, preparing yourself financially, and then choosing the right partner. You got to make sure that you're selecting a partner who can provide both that comprehensive strategy for Local Law 97 experience, to do the filing and do all the bells and whistles that are going to be unique to your specific building. And I can't stress enough, or we can't stress enough, how strategic planning is going to have a major impact on this. You need to have a master plan that aligns your capital expenditures and your operating budgets with the right partners that are going to bring these solutions to you. A low bid or that value engineering mentality is not going to deliver the desired outcomes. In fact, if you actually look at the industry as a whole, this is kind of what got us here in the first place. So develop that plan that's unique for your building, and it's going to be right for your specific situation. And then I'm going to kind of summarize this with, patience. So patience is going to be key here. Understanding that, that these processes take time to implement, is going to be critical. And, as a call to action, we'd love to collaborate with you to help develop that strategic plan, to help ensure that you are in compliance with the local laws while optimizing your building performance. We can start to help you achieving those goals. And we want to thank you again. So I think now we're going to move to the Q&A portion of ours, and we have a few that are popping online here. So the very first one, and I'm not going to take it in any, is let's see here. First question. What are my assistant options for Local Law 97?
So we kind of assumed, everyone on the call, that this was going to be one of the questions. It's one of the questions that Nick and I face with on a daily basis. So right here on the screen right now, we have some of the rebates, incentives, and financing, right, that are available. This really should be part of that preliminary review. Whether you're using HLZAE or you're using another industry professional, you really have to mandate that understanding the rebates, incentives, and financing options be reviewed as part of that planning session. I can't stress it enough, because, to be very honest, incentives come and go. And if somebody's doing an evaluation period for a building and they've identified a few energy conserving measure type of projects, and there are available incentives, say from Con Edison, at the time that you finish that review, it may be very important as part of the overall strategy to actually design and submit the plan and the upgrade to Con Edison to lock that incentive in. You may not be looking to do the project for maybe another year or so, but front loading the design costs, getting the design done, and then locking in the incentive with Con Edison is really all part of the strategy. And that's really what the trusted advisor and your professional has to be bringing to the table, because they will change. And they may not be available when you design the job the way you originally thought it was going to be designed a year out, 2 years out. Now that incentive's gone, it upsets the ROI on the job, and it just now requires additional financing that maybe otherwise wasn't required. So again, just to kind of recap here, obviously NYSERDA, this has been part of the whole landscape of energy conserving measures all the way back to 2013 when Local Law 87 came out. They're also a big part of, funding a lot of the cogeneration jobs. Con Edison, this is probably one of the more easier ones to grab incentives from. The IRA tax rebates. This is a very interesting one that's of late to see what tax incentives there are for some of these qualifying projects. Beneficial electrification. And then special financing opportunities for projects, green bank financing, PACE financing, which are all listed on the Department of Energy's website.
So we have a few more questions popping in here. Can you expand on some of the DOB's new proposed rules?
Sure.
Yeah,
We can.
I'd be happy
Thank
to
you, Nick.
take this one. So there was a whole package of rules released a week and a half ago. Some of these new rules have to do about affordable housing investment fund. So there will be carbon offsets available for purchase, up to 10% of carbon emissions for certain buildings. This money will go directly into reinvestment fund for affordable housing decarbonization measures. The costs for the carbon offsets will be the same exact price that a ton of CO2 costs you if you without compliance. So $268 for a ton of carbon emissions offsets will equate to $268 fine. So there might not be a benefit for savings on the money side, but per compliance and reinvesting into the community is what the city's going for. Also, there's coefficients of emissions for different biofuels and new rules for cogeneration. And I think there was a question that's related to some of the new rules, and that was the compliance platform for Local Law 97. The BEAM carbon emissions platform, another online reporting tool, will be used for Local Law 97. And that tool will connect to ESPM, which is your Local Law 84 energy benchmarking software, and the DOB Now to compile data from your building. So you will still need a registered design professional to input a test to those numbers. But the picture is becoming clearer on how compliance is going to be made.
Okay. Now we have more popping in here. So please, can you talk a bit about the electrification credit as it relates to Local Law 97 equipment upgrade options, and how is it intended to be calculated?
Yeah, so this is another complicated one, but the beneficial electrification credit is basically New York City's Local Law 97 enacted incentive for buildings to electrify. And if you electrify a current fossil fuel piece of equipment between now and 2027, you get double the credit for the carbon emissions that you're saving. So not only will you reduce your penalty if you're over the limit, you will also get a credit in the form of carbon emissions to be applied to future years. And you get a single form of that credit after 2027. And the earlier that you implement beneficial electrification credit, the more years you can apply it to after the fact. So there is a Local Law 97-320 filing guide that does a good job of explaining this. We also put this within our reports if we're suggesting any beneficial electrification credits. So we can detail out the years that we recommend you use that credit for. So you can bank the credit and use it for future years, but only up to a certain point.
Okay. Next question here is, are the good faith efforts only necessary if a building is facing fines for exceeding the limits in 2025? Specifically, Local Law 88, the lighting filing is due 12/31/24, will be filed, but will not likely be compliant due to tenant space issues / expiration happening in early 2025.
So this one's a little bit in the weeds, but if you file your Local Law 88 report, you should still be able to be in compliance with the submission, although you might have outstanding measures that need to be taken. So that's something that can be a one-off submission to the DOB, and you would need a registered design professional to attest to those measures being taken with a DOB filing or an electrical contractor that's signed on to make those corrections in your building.
Okay. Have another couple ones that are just popping here. So is the carbon neutral goal by 2050 mandatory or just a predicted expectation?
Oh, I can take that one. I would make the very simple argument that everything that we talked about today from an upgrade standpoint is not mandatory. but you will pay the fines, and you would pay the fines pretty severely, right, as we approach that end point of 2050 as the plan is laid out right now. Again, so going back to is it mandatory or not, by implementing these measures, obviously you're replacing likely outdated equipment, which is likely something you're going to have to do anyway. You're reducing, say, what your fuel usage is by operating more efficient equipment. And then you're obviously reducing, maintenance of the equipment because you're putting in new equipment. And then, as you approach the end here, you're reducing your fines. So again, it's a bit of an equation that has to be looked at to see what is the best bang for the buck. Because I've sat on many meetings where a particular building, how it was constructed or the systems that it had might be good all the way until 2035, say, and then when 2035 hits, they're only going to be getting, say, a $40,000 or $50,000 per year fine. While that's not nothing, does that necessarily warrant, spending several $1 million, right, on system upgrades or an envelope upgrade? So that's all really part of the evaluation. I also think there's a bit of uncertainty as you get further out in the compliance periods, because those limits haven't really been etched in stone yet versus how the limits have been etched in stone for the earlier period. So I do think that it's a goal and mandatory to some extent. And I do think that it's very possible that there could be a reevaluation of the fourth and fifth compliance periods to see what those limits are based on how the work is progressing overall in the city as we approach those milestones.
Okay. Is there, we have someone that wants to know what applies to New Jersey, especially as it relates to carbon credits. So it's kind of like a general market type of question.
Yeah, so the answer to that, I'm just going to cover both bases here. If you're implementing a carbon credit project that has to feed into Zone J in New York State, so there's a whole list of compliance regulatory items that need to be met. So I won't go further down that road. And then Local Law 97 is only the 5 boroughs of New York City. And although New Jersey has enacted its own similar greenhouse gas emissions limit, but that's not what we're talking about today. Happy to answer those offline.
Okay. There's a square footage question about measuring for GFA. I love acronyms. I'm assuming that's gross floor area.
Floor area. That's my guess.
Yeah.
So I can jump in on that one. So look, this is a big part of what we're doing right now, getting clients prepared for their first filing. We've certainly measured up plenty of 100,000 square foot buildings. It really comes down to the plans that a building owner or a manager may have available to an engineer or architect before he or she goes in. We've had to do some buildings with nothing in hand, and it's measuring up select floors, confirmation that the floors are similar, and then extrapolating versus having a set of plans for previous renovations, alterations for the building that we can utilize as kind of a starting off point, and then confirming in the field. A rough number, I would budget somewhere in the $5,000 range. But again, I would say on the minus side, if significant accurate plans can be provided, possibly a little bit on the plus side if no plans are provided, and it's a unique building in that there is not that typical floor plate as you go up the building, and it's changing floor by floor.
Okay. Next question is, have greenhouse gas coefficients been published for compliance periods after the first upcoming period?
The answer to that is yes. The greenhouse gas coefficients for fuel types has been published for the first 2 compliance periods. So as John mentioned in the slide that showed the coefficients coming down for electricity and district steam, those are projected from the DOB, but they're not written into law past the 2030 to 2035 period. And then the greenhouse gas coefficients for space use types has been published all the way out to 2050. So we know where the limits are going to be. We just don't know what your actual emissions will be.
Okay. Next question here is, how how does the 2024 baseline work if the building is currently under construction? It's been vacant for years and it's not scheduled to be fully occupied for another 2 years.
I think, Nick, we would have to assume on that question that, there's a meter, right? There's some sort of meter, even if it's just for electricity. So basically, it would be calculated on what the usage, right, of the building would be during either that vacant or construction period. I could easily make the argument that during those periods, they would be quite a bit lower than what they would be during the occupancy of the building. So that in itself could be a bit of advantage during that period. And then, what you could always do is have a registered design professional take your equipment schedules and then kind of start to project out what they will be once the building is either partially or fully occupied, so that you have a little bit of visibility into what you could be looking at once the building is fully constructed, renovated, or occupied.
Yeah, I would agree with that, John. And if it's a true gut renovation of a building, your registered design professional who designs the HVAC system should be able to do that, and it should be part of that design. Otherwise, projections can be made, as John said.
And that's that. Thank you, Nick, for that, because that's an overarching statement that I really kind of want to solidify, with this group, is that almost every major project that you're undertaking in an existing building in New York City should have Local Law 97 in the back of your mind or the back of your registered design professional's mind. If not, I feel like you're shortchanging yourself when you could be spending, say, a little bit more money, 10, 15% more on a particular project, which is netting you a better ROI, better fuel savings on an annual running basis, lower maintenance because you have new equipment, and then reducing the fines at least over one compliance period, if not eliminating them.
Okay. Next question is, do you recommend replacing the heating and cooling equipment in a building before or after you look at the building envelope?
Yeah.
If the exterior is updated, will the heating and cooling equipment replacement cost be less expensive?
The old chicken or the egg question, and that's why a building needs to be holistically reviewed, right? If you're holistically reviewing a building, for example, you have an older pre-war building, maybe it has single pane windows, non-insulated frames, all of the above that we know are big energy loss factors. By tightening up the facade, doing a window replacement program, insulating the roof, now you've really tightened up the envelope. I personally done many projects over the years where that impact alone has saved the building a third, on fuel costs, because you're just reducing the runtime. So again, you can make the argument that you can do either or first, but the most important thing is to know where you stand with both, what you plan to do with both, because that will very well impact how you maybe size the new heating plant, right? So if you know that you're going to do the heating plant first, for example, because there are good Con Edison incentives, and you want to do that first, especially if your existing boilers are on their last leg and the maintenance costs are just out of sorts. But knowing that 5 years from now you're going to do a full window replacement program, you have to build that into your calculation, because you may have the ability to slightly undersize your two boiler heating plant, undersize for the current loss factor, right? And maybe two boilers might have to run a little bit more than they normally would. But then as you approach doing your next round of projects, say 5 years later, and you do all of your windows, now you get that traditional N+1 type of design. One boiler carries the building, full redundancy, and your fuel costs have gone down.
So I think kind of along that line, there's another question here. So my building is less than 20 years old, and we invested in energy efficiency and complied with all the requirements at the time. Now we have an F grade. Why do we need to pay penalties if we didn't do anything wrong or against code?
Oh, there's a few components of that I kind of want to break down. It always does come down to usage, right? So depending on how the building is being run, who is maybe an occupier or a tenant of the building could drastically be impacting how the building scores are. So, for example, if a building has a particular tenant that has a 24/7 type of operation, that in itself could be doubling, the fuel usage, right, alone, right? So that's obviously, a big issue. So you really need to look at, how the building is being run. For example, one of the local law 87 things was simultaneous heating and cooling, right? You have no idea how many buildings Nick and I walk into, and we come to find out that you're heating the building over here, you're cooling the building over here to meet a certain set point, and you're spending double the amount of fuel to get to that point. So just doing that review of the building to understand and make sure that the low-hanging fruit is being addressed is obviously very important. And here's the other overarching statement. When people are designing or constructing buildings and they're going by the code is the minimum, right? Even the energy code, safety codes, it is the minimum, right? So, and 20 years ago, Local Law 97 wasn't a thing. So there weren't that forward thinking of reducing carbon emissions, greening the grid, going with equipment that had coefficients of performance that are 2- and 3-fold over what you had. So think about it. You built a building 20 years ago, hypothetically. You met all the code minimums at that point in time. That was a snapshot in time. And as things evolve and as we see charts that have, New York City as the third highest in the world for carbon emissions output, greenhouse gases, there was a reaction to that by the city. And unfortunately, the rules have changed. I would also make the argument if you design, built, and have been running a building that's 20 years old now, components there likely are approaching the end of their useful life. So you're probably coming up on some milestones to be looking at, and you should coincide those milestone upgrades with what are the current rules and regulations with a little bit of forward thinking.
Okay. We're kind of getting up against the end of time here, but there's one other question here that I think is kind of important. What if we've already completed a compliance report, but we haven't filed it because it's not due yet? What should we be thinking about?
Yeah, so there has been no compliance reporting completed to date, and it's due May 1st, 2025. So if you've had a carbon emissions benchmarking study done by an energy provider, that's great. You know where you are, but Local Law 97 requires that actual emissions for the calendar year are submitted into the platform that will be used for compliance. So if we're talking about this is the year right now that the meter's running, it will be counted towards the first year of Local Law 97 in this first compliance period. Not until January 1st or sometime shortly after, when you receive every single one of your energy bills from Con Edison, National Grid, whoever it be, and any fuel deliveries, can you then start to input that data. So there, sometime between January 25 and May 1st of 25 is when that compliance reporting can be done.
All right. Well, so we are like at 2:55 now, so I think we're going to wrap up. But I'd like to thank everyone for their attendance. And again, I think, the big takeaway is, you need to be thinking about this now and putting that strategic plan behind it to make sure that you're well positioned for success. And with that, I'd like to thank you for your time, and we look forward to seeing you on the next one. Thank you.